welcome to another episode of Be Free, Be Fun, Be Fearless with Dr. Rana Al-Falaki, who of course is me. And I am thrilled today to be joined by the most phenomenal woman. I tell you, we had a chat last week, having finally got a chance to connect with conversations rather than messages. And I was just blown away and told all my friends and colleagues, my energy was up here. And I was just saying, I have just had a conversation with the most phenomenal woman. So you are in for such a treat today. So we are joined by Sally Anderson. Now, on paper, she's down as the leadership coach to the influencers. And we're going to talk a lot about her key point of difference, which is about sustainable transformation, both on a personal and professional level. You know, we're not just going to talk about leadership. We're not just going to talk about coaching. We're going to talk about how you can almost change your DNA and why it's important to do that. So that's all I'm going to say, because Sally's going to tell you all about it. Welcome, Sally, from New Zealand, more than across the pond.
So first of all, I take my hat off to you for the platform that you provide to all the amazing thought leaders that you have on your show, and feel very privileged to be here today. So yes, I'm coming to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, if I don't mind saying so. Obviously a tad bit biased. So yeah, looking forward to dancing in conversation with you today about what I'm very passionate about. So probably the best place to start would be September the 11th. I think most people, most of your listeners will remember where they were when September 11th occurred. So I was about 5 blocks from Ground Zero, working with a group of executives, not realizing on the 10th, not realizing what was going to happen on the 11th. And I was in charge of a global restructure program, 3,000 projects across the Netherlands, Boston, and New York. And I loved what I did corporately. So I would go into large organizations and implement belief, behavioral, cultural change, bringing in a projectized culture to an organization. So I had accountability for Dordrecht, Rotterdam, Den Haag, Amsterdam, Boston, New York offices, and would fly around those locations whilst I was on the assignment. So millions of dollars would be spent on these change programs that I would implement, and I knew they'd never get a return on their investment 3 to 5 years after I walked out the door. The amount of money, still to this day, that is spent on coaches, on consultants, on off-the-shelf trainings, on off-the-shelf culture change initiatives for very questionable ROI back into the business, and it's still happening to this day. So nobody's focusing on the sustainability element of the transformative process. So I felt a bit like a prostitute in the system as a consultant, excuse the expression, because I cared. I was always viewed as controversial within the corporate arena, but I would always reframe it to, I just care. I'm the one in there doing the implementation with the people. So corporately, I had a huge issue with seeing the dysfunctionality. And when September 11th hit, I actually took a flight to Boston on the 10th, and I also had a very lousy cup of coffee at the base of the Trade Center Towers on the 10th. So I was one day out, and I was supposed to be in New York on the 11th, but I intuitively decided to leave the day before. So being in Boston on that morning, it was about 5:30 in the morning. I was sending out initiatives. I just led the executive team meeting and was firing out, executive directives left, right, and center, and had the PA of the CEO call me and say, how can you be so insensitive to what is going on? I said, well, what do you mean? Because I didn't turn on the television or anything. And then she obviously let me know. And so there's no terrorism clauses in your contract as a consultant at that time. Every single airport in the United States, unprecedented shutdown. So it's kind of like my wake-up call. And I kind of thought, as much as I loved what I did, I was being called to turn in another direction. So when I returned to New Zealand, I decided to go out on my own as an executive coach. And it wasn't part of my plan to develop my own education, but I did, and started working with the most extraordinary thought leader in Australia, Matt Church, who heads up Global Thought Leaders. His ethos is, if you're at the leading edge of thought, you're pretty much lousy at packaging yourself up and taking yourself to market. How do you get all 6 plates spinning revenue, keynote speaking, authoring, training, facilitation, coaching, mentoring? So I went on a phenomenal journey with him. I created all my own education. I wrote 2 books, been on 2 60-minute documentaries, and have been banging the tambourine for quite some time. So I've been 30 years in the leadership space. I entered the boardrooms at 23 years of age, held leadership positions ever since, and have been in predominantly male-dominated industries, so I understand the terrain. So I have, for the last 20 years specifically, coached at the most senior level, and that is my passion area. The fish stinks from the head down. There's a lot of little boys, little girls running businesses. And over the last 20 years, I have created what I term co-creative leadership or equanimous leadership. That's how I term it. Most traditional linear leadership teachings are what I term 1 to 3 dimensional thinking, and most leaders are unconsciously competent in that arena. They yawn at the prospect of going to yet another leadership retreat or another leadership training. They're unconsciously competent in their subject matter expertise, but the area which is the weakest is the non-linear, more belief, behavioral, cultural change, the so-called soft skills, which are anything but soft, which this pandemic has forced the leadership IQ into the leadership EQ. But I believe beyond the quotient of intelligence and the quotient of emotion, there is also spiritual intelligence, holistic intelligence, and alchemical intelligence. That's more the domain that I live, which is what I term 4th, 5th, and beyond dimension. So co-creative leadership, who you are in your human form is limited, who you are in your co-creative form is limitless. And equanimous leadership is the ability to be the observer of what is, not how it could have been, should have been, wanted it to be. Being able to have that type of Zen management at the most senior level is extraordinary. You can't put a price on it. Living and leading an equanimous life is the ultimate, and I believe it surpasses what it means to be self-actualized. So given that I was banging the tambourine 20 years ago on this and did a lot of work with the Legacy Leadership Institute in Canada, I called myself a legacy coach when I first went out. Whew, I had balls, I tell you. Legacy is one of the most profound conversations you can facilitate with a human being on the planet. What are you doing here? What is your DNA calling you to be in the world? We all have an individual imprint, you know. And so yeah, it's been a journey. And I launched in America in 2013, launched in Australia in 2015, coached over 100 coaches in my methodology. So I'm a coach intuitive, not formally trained in anything, which is probably why I get away with everything. I'll go to places other coaches won't go to get results other coaches won't get. And my passion areas are, you know, high-end CEOs, working with politicians, celebrities, millionaires, billionaires, and special forces. So my aim is to have my education in the hands of those that are making a significant difference on the planet. So I'm a threat to the pharmaceutical industry. They're not interested in sustainable solutions. The weight loss industry is a $1 trillion industry, not interested in sustainable solutions. So, you know, when you're a disruptor, you're not that popular. But I care. I fundamentally care that something as basic as giving depression drugs to 4 to 5 to 6-year-olds is just not okay in my book. So I've done 30 years of keynote speaking. So I used to train the bureaus that if they want a safe speaker, not to book me, because I'm not interested in just showing up and, you know, inspiring people. It's a speaker's responsibility to be remembered. How many speakers have you heard in the last 2, 5, or 10 years? Can you remember their name and can you remember their message? So I took it very seriously that it was a responsibility to ensure that those sitting in your audience knew how they could take action when they left with what it is that you were advocating. So in the last 2 to 3 years, I've really niched it down and am excited, although I'm on LinkedIn, which is the only social media conduit that I operate on. I am excited about 2021. I think it's one of the most exciting times for those in the leadership coaching profession specifically, because most leaders are used to being in control. And at the moment, leaders are struggling with being able to navigate uncertainty. And uncertainty is my domain. The whole co-creative realm, go to everything that confronts you, has you be resistant, has you be uncomfortable, because that's where the magic lies. So being able to partner senior leaders on how to navigate the uncertainty and instead of survive it, thrive it, is what I'm really passionate about.
Thank you for sharing that, some of that story, Sally, and we'll share a few bit more later, but just to pick up on a couple of those points. It's interesting what you say, you know, about the IQ versus the EQ, and we are starting to hear this more in the public domain now, that actually, you know, leadership is not this linear aspect, and you do need to use those soft skills. You do need to use your intuition. You do need to know how to inspire people. You do need to really be that eagle watching from above. And you know the analogy about the eagle, you know, I absolutely love that. So let's maybe take a deeper dive into this aspect of, because it's exactly as you said, you know, the soft skills, people take it for granted, but they're actually the hardest to do. And a lot of people think, oh, that's not me and I can't train it. I mean, I specialize on training people on their intuition because it's such a massive thing and you can train it. So perhaps, why don't you talk a little, because I'd love us to maybe lay down those foundations to realize this is not a wishy-washy subject. And then maybe we could then move into the direction of the sustainable aspect, and actually why, when you do that, everything becomes sustainable.
Sure. Well, they say that human beings are the most intelligent species on the planet. I would question that. The fact that we're still killing each other is a pretty prime example. So what fascinates me, there was an article written recently about, and it was backed up by statistics. It was backed up by some, you know, pretty heavy-hitting people in leadership that was endorsing this particular philosophy. And I read this article and I'm just going, oh my God. Because in the article, it basically said, you know, that you know, leadership is now moving into what used to be termed soft skills or feminine leadership skills, and how fascinating this is, and quantifying, you know, why it's so important. And I'm going, it took a viral pandemic for those that are in leadership, you know, globally, to consider that the most standard thing with a human being is connection. And you can't have connection unless you got emotion. And whether you're good at it or not, that's another thing. But the fact that you have to get statistics and you have to get heavy-hitting people to quantify the importance of these so-called, I'm going, you got to be joking, you know, and everybody's going, oh my God, you know, it's amazing, you know, these new skills that we need to learn. I'm just going, man, I don't know whether I'm in my own camp or what the go is, but this is just ridiculous, you know. You know, coming from people who are, you know, so-called intelligent, you know. So as far as, you know, the balance of IQ, EQ, soft skills and human skills and everything that we're talking about, it is integral. We were born connected, we were born intuitive, and we were born fearless. That was our birthright as human beings. And then we forgot. So part of the work that I do is bring people back to their innate birthright. As a leader, it is your responsibility to be a fearless leader. I believe I am one of the most fearless practitioners on the planet. And your listeners will understand why that is a bit later on in the podcast. But in segueing into what you were just touching on before, given that I specialize in sustainability, every single person on the planet has what I term a default identity, a default blueprint. Everybody's had different upbringings. I didn't design it, people, it's just the way it is. But the formation of your default occurs on average, between the ages of 3 and 5. So in the study of ontology, the study of what it is to be human, they distinguished that there were 3 negative incidences in your childhood between the ages of 3 to 5, 5 to 12, 12 to 21, and pretty much is when you separated. And then you live out of those decisions that you made as a child. There's a lack of awareness-based training in the schooling system. And the power of awareness-based training, which is the education that I've developed, is that once you're aware, then you are left with choice. Choice is one of the most profound distinctions on the planet. You have a choice in how you feel, choice in how you respond, choice in what you do, you have a choice. Most people don't feel as though they do because they're not conscious. And although we have a viral pandemic going on, we also have a fear pandemic going on, and it has highlighted the degree of disassociation that we have on this planet. No wonder that we are so dependent on acronym-oriented diagnoses to be then that is then authorized as kosher, that if I have now PTSD and ADHD and all these acronym-oriented diagnoses, it's okay to go and throw yourself onto the drugs. So I believe I have a non-drug related solution to most of any form of mental illness, which is extraordinary. I'm very clear what I have. So my passion, though, is because this particular area here of the default identity is the reason why people can't sustain change. So when you think about an organization, we have individuals within an organization, we have a human collective. If we are to entertain, which I believe, every single person within the organization has a default identity that they're not aware of, then you must have a default undercurrent within every organization on the planet that's not distinguished, that's not addressed, and everybody's focused on the so-called bottom line. And yet, the irony of that bottom line could change exponentially if they understood how to understand the human condition more. I challenge counseling and psychotherapy, more so the dysfunctional aspect. They psychoanalyze the default, I disappear it, so that you no longer have to oscillate and that your new default becomes your empowered state. So obviously my passion and sense of urgency is getting this in the hands of those that can make a difference. An example would be PTSD. I am not in any way, shape or form discrediting those that believe that they have it. All I'm saying is that if there was a solution that provided a non-drug related path that sustained the change of that individual and a collective, would that be something of interest? I think so. So it takes something to be a disruptor. And the path for myself, I've experienced more adversity than most. I believe that you never give it anything that you can't handle. That can land like a cup of cold sick for most people. And I have needed to transition my own default identity. I've been to every extremity of psychosis known to man, and speak from a hell of a lot of experience in my own experience and those that I've had the privilege to coach over the last 30 years. And feel as though I've done the years in the trenches, and that 2021 for me is about being able to get this education in the hands of those that can make a difference en masse. We need different solutions. Traditional leadership, linear leadership is dead, deader than dead. And we as I wrote an article recently on mental health in the most senior level. When you think about mental health in the workplace, most organizations really don't want to have to deal with it. So it's more of a compliance thing. Let's be seen to be doing something about it. This is a generalization. Let's seem to be doing something about it. I'd rather not have to deal with it. Obviously, even highlighted even more due to the pandemic. So it's all the buzzword, in the workplace well-being. Well, what the hell happens at the most senior level when they're under more pressure than anybody? Let's not talk about it. Houston, we have a problem, but let's not talk about it. The stigmatization of mentioning anything to do with not being able to cope. The statistics that came out of it was actually a LinkedIn survey of senior executives over a period of time during COVID. And most of the stats were like 70, 80%, questioning their leadership ability in a way that they never have, not being able to answer all the questions and having no way of being able to find those solutions. The impact on their mental state. I could keep going.
I think it's important to say there, most likely reasons for that are there isn't a rule book for that, because there's a rule book in your traditional leadership thought about what to do, and suddenly you're on unstable ground and you're being asked to act intuitively. You're being asked to respond rather than react and reassess.
Yep. So usually it takes an act of God, tsunamis, tornadoes, fires, earthquakes, pandemics, to awaken consciousness en masse. So for all the whys and the wherefores, and I'm not in any way, shape or form discrediting what this has done to humanity as a whole. However, there is also the positive aspect of what has occurred. And the irony I find is that through social distancing, we have become more connected as a planet than we ever have been in the history of the planet. So it was needed. Where we were headed, obviously, was not where the universe wanted us to head. And nature is a very powerful thing. I often say to leaders, have you ever tried to plant a seed in the ground? do you stand over it and go, grow, you bastard? Because it's this forcing mentality versus you can learn a lot through nature. If you water it, cultivate it, manure it, it will grow in the right time and space. And so I've witnessed a lot of people on the planet going through the hero's journey. I'm a huge advocate of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And I believe that if you weren't willing to grow, evolve, or change pre-COVID, you're now being forced to. And that's not only at the leadership level, but I feel for those leaders at the most senior level because they're hurting right now. When you've made God knows how many retrenchments in a given day, your wife isn't talking to you, your kids aren't talking to you, you're working from home, you're questioning your own mental state, your addictions have escalated, you've got nobody to talk to, and if you did, you were terrified of losing your own position and your financial stability. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. The article that I wrote recently was for the political sector. I have loved the time that I've spent coaching politicians in the past and returning there, because politicians specifically, what they face within the bullpit within government, what they face within the opposition, what they face within the media, both online trolling as well as character assassinations, what they experience with reference to their own equilibrium and their ability to be able to cope 7 days a week, 24/7, and expected, and it's superhuman, and it's just not possible. So who do they talk to? The billionaire sector. I've had the privilege of coaching millionaires and billionaires, and oh my God, there is more dysfunction at that level when they supposedly have everything than there is. So you've got these people who want what they've got, thinking that when they get there, it's going to be better then. And then you've got these people that have everything and some, and they're still not happy. So I believe the biggest addiction on the planet is dissatisfaction. This isn't it yet. There's somewhere else to get. And when I get there, it's going to be better then. And that place called there. And where is that place called there? Because there's only the now moment and you're never here.
Well, I call them the wantaholics, right? Those are my clients. It's the wantaholics and all the symptoms that are associated with that, because that's what we think we want. And you know, as a coach as well, and especially the type of coach you are. And so I know we're very in line in that way. Whatever somebody says they want, or whatever the conversation is about, it's never really about that. And it's our job to tease that out, because you don't realize. So yeah, so when we are, I mean, especially in the business world and the leadership world and the millionaire world, it's the wantaholics, because you're striving for a thing rather than a way of being. And it's only when you recognize that when you change your way of being, which is where consciousness comes in, which is where response, which is where choice, and actually, being able to oversee, being able to be that eagle, being that being, that truly shifts you, that actually you can cope with anything, and you stop the wanting, because you realize you have it all. And then you can add to it, the same way as you could buy something in a shop, but it doesn't come with that same energy.
But how many books do we need to read that say, be careful what you think, your thoughts create your reality? And most people are not disciplined in what goes through their mind on a day-to-day basis, the 5 key relinquishment buckets that human beings, part of the human condition. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough money. I don't know how. And manifesting illness to abdicate responsibility. My reframe for responsibility is that you have the ability to respond differently once you are aware. So the irony every day within your partner, within your work colleagues, your friends, because they're all human. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough energy. I don't have. It's kind of like, well, people who are committed always find the time, always find the energy, always find the money, always will look after their well-being to ensure energetically that they the difference between wanting something and being committed to it is to do with the default identity. And language creates the reality of your world. If you want the reality of your world to change your language. So I'm a coach intuitive. Language is my vehicle. Dangerous woman to talk to. Coach to cause, not symptom. And given that I haven't been formally trained in anything, a lot of my processes are quite unorthodox. Why? Because I'm interested in results. Most of my clients are people who have been there, done that, both personally and professionally. But my question to them is, if you've invested all of this money into personal and professional development, and you haven't experienced the level of transformation that you've wanted, nor have you known how to sustain it, what's the point? Which is where I come in. So I led my own 3-day leadership retreats for 10 months of the year for 10 years. That's a big case study. Extraordinary experience, and 10 years of facilitating that level of change. And those retreats would always attract people from all walks of life, specifically in leadership roles and so forth. But it was always a mix, and only 10 per retreat. And what I got to see in that time that fascinated me was that I would say upwards of 90% of people had a belief that they wanted to top themselves, that they didn't want to be here, that their self belief was that low. I'm talking 90%. Now, the work I do is deep. So I talk about psychotherapy being a long process and a deep process, and there's a time for it. Counseling is a long process, but quite a shallow process, the dysfunctional aspect of counseling. I've got an issue with somebody who's seen a counsellor for 2, 5, or 10 years, still dragging out their story, paying for the privilege. The rah-rah seminars are a short process, but a shallow process. They're actually designed to have you keep going back. You get the short shot of euphoria, you feel great for a while, and then back into same old, same old. So where I position my education is that it's a deep process, but a short process. People want friggin' results, and they want to know how to sustain it. And so witnessing, people think that dysfunction comes from what they've experienced in their life. So the first stat that came out of that 10-year case study was that 90% of people didn't want to be here. 2 is that people who've experienced next to nothing are more dysfunctional than those that are warranted. You know, if you go from being sexually abused from birth through to 16, that person's got a bit of a problem, right? They're warranted to kind of like, you know, have whatever's going on for them. But a person who hasn't even had their cat die, I'm not trying to take the piss here, but seriously, they haven't even had their cat die, are more dysfunctional than that person. And I witnessed that over a 10-year period, that it's not about the happening, it's what you do with the happening. And I'm a prime example of that. That psychologically fascinates the hell out of me. And so as far as dysfunction is concerned, all of human suffering is a function of what we make things mean. If you don't want to suffer anymore, stop making it mean something. But you can't stop the meaning unless you get in tune with how disassociated you are. You can rattle off the cost, but until you're present to the cost, you're moving a friggin' heartbeat. I talk about the dog on the nail. Dog's howling. One guy says, the other guy said, why does your dog keep on howling? And the other guy says, because my dog's sitting on a nail. And the other guy says, why didn't the dog just get off the nail? The other guy says, because it doesn't hurt enough yet. You got a nail so far up your rectum, it's painful, but it's become the norm. What becomes acceptable becomes inevitable, right? And it takes usually tap on the shoulder, we ignore, 4x2 at the back of the head, we ignore, Mack truck. Then we might get with the program, sadly. So I'm excited. I'm excited about the positive aspects of COVID and what it's doing to society as a whole, not only in the leadership domain, but in humanity as a whole. People are becoming kinder. Oh, novel concept. Love is all there is. And even in the context of faith, you know, faith for me is about trusting the unknown as much as the known. I'm not attached to what you call it, higher power, universal force, collective consciousness, God. Have you ever tried to vacuum when you haven't plugged it in and turned it on? It's a bit tricky. So being able to take love and faith into the highest levels of leadership is a profound privilege. I frame faith in the word co-creation. It's the most palatable word that I can use in corporate. I've coached everybody from atheism right through to every religious faith, every spiritual faith, every sect. It's not my job to question what people believe. My job is to have them walk it, because there's a lot of hypocritical people out there that believe that they're faith-based people. And from my perspective, there is a responsibility to trust the unknown realm as much as the known, and hook into your co-creative ability, which is what excites me, is that that 20 years ago, I'm not for everyone, but 20 years ago, it was a bit too outside the framework of what people would be able to cope with. You know, she's this witch, she's just a woo-woo person, she's this whatever. Whereas now it's kind of like, oh, that unknown thing that we're having to deal with right now, you know, it's kind of like, I got you on that one, you know.
the perfect example. And I think it's really important here to bring across when we are talking about sustainable change and transformational change. I really want to call out. Now, I don't want to attract the mass hatred of other coaches here, but you're probably quite like me, Sally. I tell you what, I read some of the stuff and I just see through the bullshit. And I see through the false promises. And I would never put anyone else down. It's fine. You know, every single person to their own. And you hope that everybody's doing it from a heart-centered place because they truly care. But it shouldn't just be about them. It should be about and everybody wins. But it really, it does irk me because, like you say, you could just take the money and it's like an elastic band. You don't stretch it long enough. And actually it's not even about stretching it long enough. It's about stretching it and then changing it, right? If you mold a material long enough, it changes its qualities once and for all. And that, for me, is the most powerful thing you can do. And so what you're talking about with sustainable change, and I'm totally in line with you there, because again, the aim of the stuff I do is it's about your core energies. Let's change who you are, because then through co-creation, your surroundings and everything around you and the way people respond to you as a leader will change. We don't have to bring in the woo-woo. You know, you don't have to sit and form a circle. That's not what we're talking about in the business realm. But change your core. And I think it's really important, coming back to what I wanted to say, was when we were talking about defaults, because we do have defaults. We have default stresses. Some people under a stressful situation will immediately go into victim mode. Some people will immediately react and become, you know, into blame mode or fear or frustration. Or some people will be like, okay, it's fine. And where do we go from here? And then we have a default when everything seems to be going well for us, right? And what we're talking about with that default, that kind of energetic makeup, if you like, as opposed to our, you know, if we've learned now we can change our genes. We think, okay, we've got this set of genes in ourselves and we can't change them, but we know through all the brain work that has been done, we can change our DNA in many ways. And of course, so what we're talking about here with changing the default to make sustainable change is to change what your default is. You can elevate. Your default doesn't have to be, it's fine. When something seems to be going well, okay, it's fine, yeah, that's all right, it's not so bad, or how can I serve you? Your default could be, let's take this to a point of view, let's always look for opportunity, purpose, leadership, joy, flow, focus, productivity, all those leadership skills, right? We're talking woo-woo, but we're not talking woo-woo. And the trick is, in changing, in doing that default, is to shift your default from one and elevate you up to the next level, to that point of co-creation.
So moment by moment, we're either in an empowered state or a disempowered state. Exactly. And I don't talk about positivity and negativity. Mm-hmm. No disrespect to Norman Vincent Peale, the creator of grandfather of positive thinking. However, just being positive doesn't cut it sometimes. And to me, positivity and negativity is more of an intellectual thing, whereas empowerment and disempowerment is more of an experiential thing.
And it's also a judgment, right? And a judgment is, again, is associated with a lower energy and not a conscious state when we make those judgments, positive and negative, right? It just is powered and disempowered, you know, absolutely spot on. One more thing I want to say while you're talking about positive and negative is also, I think it's really important to say here, and I'd love you to expand on that, as well as, you know, this whole thing about, be positive, and we're in agreement about that. There's also the mindset piece, because it's not all about mindset either. Carry on.
So, in the organization,
disempowered, and the positive, negative, and I'd love you to diss the idea of it's not all mindset.
Well, my issue is around healing. Healing has a lousy connotation in the marketplace. And I believe that healing needs to be one of the number one strategies in every single boardroom on this planet. And when I talk about it, you know, people kind of like look at me kind of like sideways. I'm going, here's the deal. Every single organization is a makeup of human beings. In the work that I've developed, there are 7 layers to somebody's default blueprint. If they're not aware of those 7 layers, then they are hindering their potential to be the best that they can be. because obviously through awareness, you have choice, and through awareness, you can evolve. Um, Evolving beyond the linear realm takes something, and usually it comes through adversity. I wrote in both of my books about a thing called culturalization. Currently, the only way that the planet evolves is through adversity. The irony, my entire life path has been extreme adversity, which is the irony of now what I teach. I believe that part of my life path, my life apprenticeship, is to bring to the world a philosophy that it is possible to evolve to higher levels of consciousness without the need to manifest adversity. There's a concept. So, in the context of human beings, if they don't heal their past, regardless of what it is that they've experienced, which is relative for each individual, their past will always be in their future. And that has a huge impact on the vibrational energy of the individual, of their ecosystem, of their experience on the planet. The lack of awareness, specifically within the ecosystem of an organization, around healing. I'm sorry, but if it, I didn't design it, every single human being experienced. A CEO will always say to me, Sally, why when I brought you in to talk to you about my company, are you talking to me about my childhood? I'm going, look, I have zero interest in dragging up your past, but I am going to go and take a snapshot, get the hell out of there, and then have you see how you are still operating from the child. And if you don't harness that within your executive team, which is usually why I'd work with the CEO and the executive team to get everybody on the same page. I talk about power-based cultures versus default-based cultures, KPI-empowered cultures. There's a novel concept because most KPI cultures are disempowered and we tolerate that. Yeah, good. What's the point of having a KPI in an organization unless you meet it? It's tolerated. So in the context of cultural change, which is my domain, there is so much linear teachings out there on how to go from here to here, versus when you're talking about mindset before, something as simple as the inner critic. To be human is to have an inner critic. Nobody talks about it, and yet it annihilates human potential. Why do we not have mastery of the inner critic in the schooling system? I had the worst inner critic 24/7, high volume, couldn't turn it off. For a good 20 years. And when I read some of the education that's out in the marketplace, to put a rubber band on your wrist and flick it every time that you hear you're in a critic. I mean, are you kidding? If it doesn't already inflict enough pain, it's inane. I can talk to a 9-year-old child and who has a heinous inner critic. I can talk to a 49-year-old client who's had 4 decades of self-abuse. My process is pretty unorthodox to shift people. And who would you be and what could you accomplish if you never heard that voice? I'm not interested in managing it or coordinating yourself around it. What would it be like if you silenced your inner critic? And we just that one thing, if that changed within the human psyche as we know it, and it was adopted in the schooling system, it would change the human psyche on the planet. Fact. Fact. And my interest is establishing co-creative schools, co-creative universities. I have utmost respect for the likes of Steiner and Montessori, who championed and pioneered new educationary curriculums to market, and believe what I have developed and that's now tried and proven is waiting for being birthed into the marketplace on a much larger level. It's not about Sally Anderson driving, striving, forcing, convincing people to, adopt this philosophy. I believe that my entire life opus has been to give back what I've learnt. So I talk about ignite, evolve, liberate. Like being a co-creative defibrillator, it's almost like, you got your pedals and you kind of like put them on somebody going, are you in there somewhere? Who are you? What is within your DNA that you want to bring forth to then be able to evolve them to a new level of consciousness, for them to liberate themselves. And I believe it is all of our responsibility to pay it forward. That once you have arrived, that every day. So I'm a connector. There's not a day where I don't connect people. I breathe, I connect. And I believe it's a phenomenal skill, but I also believe that everybody's capable. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And everybody can be helping everybody if they got out of their singular stinking thinking, mindset.
Yeah, yeah. Can you, would you share with us, please, because you've alluded to it a few times about what you've been through, and I know your story is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So, and it's like you say, a lot of us, when we become these thought leaders, people just see the successful side and they don't realize you've come from so much pain. But it really does help when we are a living, breathing example that you don't. Okay, there's a beautiful phrase, I quote it in my book, about, pain is inevitable, suffering is choice.
No.
And I believe that you are a prime example of that. I know I am. So would you mind sharing, as much as you're comfortable with, some of what you went through, so that people can actually realize, this isn't stuff you've read in books. This is you at your core, and you've shown how to heal.
Thanks. Yeah, I believe your story does not define who you are, but it is the backbone of your character and how you show up in the world. Your story is your story, my story is my story. The downfall is that a lot of people try and compare. So often people have said to me, how, given what you've experienced, can you listen to somebody who's experienced next to nothing? I said, well, in their world is relative to them, and I can have compassion for that. So yeah, I was born in New Zealand, and my father was a guidance counsellor, so I'm my father's daughter. We had street kids in our house since I can ever remember. Amazing man, and he was an only child, and so I'm the youngest of 4 children. Only redhead in the family, so red hair, white freckles, didn't look the same, sound the same, think the same. He wanted to excel in his guidance counselling, so packed up 4 kids and my mother, and we went to Canada, and we lived there for 4 years. So I was 2 when we went, and I came back when I was 6. So my first memory at school was 6 years of age. Yeah, one of these things stood out. Canadian accent, Kiwi Canadian accent. The only redhead, whiter than white, freckles, in a school that was predominantly Māori. The Indigenous culture here in New Zealand is Māori. And yeah, so my self-hatred started very young, and sad when I look back as to how the power of the mind can control somebody so young. But I was a keen skier. I learned to ski on Western Mountain, and I got my first job hiring out skis at the age of 15. And in the early 80s, everybody used to hitchhike, so hitchhiked into a local township. And cut a very long story short, it was one of the worst reported gang rapes in the history of New Zealand in the early 80s. I was abducted by a notorious gang, thrown onto a butcher's block, raped from every orifice by more than 100 gang members, conscious throughout the ordeal, pretty much left for dead, and then thrown onto the back of a truck, and abducted and taken to another gang location. Rapes continued until I lost consciousness. The irony, the head of that particular mob in that location drove me back to where I was from, or was staying, dropped me on the side of the road, beaten black and blue, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and it was about 7 o'clock at night. It was snowing, and I went and had a bath, scrubbed myself raw, got up the next morning, went to work, and acted like nothing had happened. Police were called, and parents, what do you say to your 15-year-old daughter? So they didn't know how to cope, and so the coping mechanism was to act like it didn't happen. So there was no support, go back to school, act like it didn't happen. The way I was treated was abhorrent. The support for victims back in those days was not good. It was almost like you brought it on yourself. The way I was treated medically was just, considering the abuse I'd already been through. So it was a 6-hour drive home in silence. I separated from my parents, and I pretty much lived into a good 20 years of psychotic behavior. So I didn't need to go to university and get a psych degree. I understand integrally every aspect of dysfunction at its worst, every addiction, every body dysmorphia, and everything to the extreme. But who I was to the world in my corporate career and who I was behind was 2 different personas. I had to separate from my body. So there was me and then there was this body. because of what was done to the body. I pretty much had to separate as it was happening to be able to survive it. So I became a course junkie. Name a course, a book, a CD. I read it, listened to it, went to it. I wasn't going to motivate myself. I was going to, how do I get to the next day? I understand suicide integrally. I've done quite a few facilitative sessions in front of psychiatrists and counselors about what they do versus what I do, because I understand the default more than most. When you've gone beyond the comprehension of human tear and come back of your own accord, you kind of like learn a few things. And I went outside the context of the human mind. And beyond the context of what human terror is. So being on the planet as a human being, having gone beyond the comprehension of human terror, it's always been difficult to just relate to the average human being, or, you know, the woman who's been raped once, twice, or whatever. Don't get me wrong. But in the context of the extremity of what I experienced, it kind of like almost like felt like a friggin' alien, you know. Because as a survivor, you have a tendency of then creating crisis to survive, crisis to survive, crisis to survive, crisis to survive, which I did very successfully. I became a professional saboteur, and who would want a woman like me? So lived out of, it was never safe to be a woman. So the depth of my voice, I received so much oral abuse that it damaged my vocal cords. So in 30 years of keynote speaking, 100% of the time people take me as a transvestite, like I'm this, they're trying to work out whether I'm a man or a woman, which as a woman's pretty, if you've got some self-hatred issues going on, and then you're in your corporate career, being likened to a man, and then when you're on the phone, 100% of the time you're taken as Mr. Anderson. So navigating that from a corporate standpoint has always been interesting. I was actually on an interview for an hour with somebody in America when I was launching in America. The entire interview was fantastic, and right at the end, he said, "Do you know the thing that I'm really excited about today?" I said, "What's that?" He said that you're going to be the first transgender personal development guru in America. The entire interview, he thought he was interviewing a transvestite. So I'm really pleased that I've done the work. So what does it mean to be a woman? Is it just wearing a dress? So exploring what femininity means has been a lifelong journey, still is. I had to exude far more masculinity to be able to do the roles that I did, as well as be able to navigate my experience. And I wouldn't change a thing for what I've learned. The mobsters are actually my spiritual initiators for what I do today. I believe that you're never given anything you can't handle. If you've been dealt it, then you've got the capability of being able to handle it, which for some people that will not land well. But I know that I am alive today to give that message. I have experienced extremity on so many different levels off the back of the dysfunction. But on the contrast, believe that I'm one of the most effective coaches on the planet in the context of fearless leadership. I will literally go to places other coaches won't go to get results other coaches won't get, and that's got nothing to do with my ego. My ego's in check there. And then in the 2018, I experienced the worst character assassination known to man, by some of the most trusted people in my business, and an untainted record. Up until 2018, I was in the middle of one of my trainings, and an article was printed on the internet. So for 9 months, I experienced online bullying, death threats. We're going to take you under. We're going to make you go bankrupt. Very targeted attack. I stayed silent throughout the ordeal. And my husband experienced a triple bypass, 2 strokes, and a carotid artery operation to avert a 3rd stroke. So I'm trying to keep my husband alive. Throw in a breast cancer scare in the middle of that. And so I declared bankruptcy in August of 2018. For fairly sobering in your mid-50s. And I questioned every aspect of my own education. I questioned every aspect of my own faith. I questioned everything. And I read a book years ago called Why Me? Why This? Why Now? By a woman called Robin Norwood. One of the best reads at the time. And sometimes when we feel like life is doing it to us, it is providing, if we trust the unknown, because I didn't come willingly to my faith by any shape of the imagination. I've been stripped of everything 3 times in my life. It's certainly one of the most powerful learning experiences. So it's taken a good 2.5 years to recalibrate, to heal, to understand, because you go crazy asking why when all I've ever done is tried to heal people and bring them back home. Would I experience something so extreme? It was like another gang rape, literally. It was on par because of the severity. So the first article came out, second article came out, and it was on the moko koi that went global: CNN, Fox News, BBC World. So then global annihilation. And then a third article came out around that I'd gone bankrupt and what a horrendous person I was. I've never read anything that lives online. I choose not to. I've very rarely spoken out in public about what happened. I trust the space. I'm talking it, so it's obviously meant. In New Zealand, the Indigenous culture is the Māori culture, and it was a profound privilege to receive what's termed a moko koi. Women wear it on the chin. Men of certain tribes have what's called a full facial tamoko, which is full facial, which my husband has. My husband is Indigenous Māori. It's not like going and getting a tattoo. It is sacred. What is controversial about it is that I'm a white woman who wears a moko koi. We followed protocol, which you would need to do, obviously, to receive. It is the bravest thing I've ever done. My respect for Māoridom is beyond words. The simplicity of the design denotes that I make transformation easy. And it's my way of me acknowledging me for what I've overcome, because nobody in society has acknowledged it's even happened. People who've experienced trauma are unable to reconcile what happened because nobody in society wants to hear it. So I wear it with pride. So when I work with leaders, I ask them, what are you prepared to do to stand and be counted? And it is one of the most controversial things I've ever done, bravest things, because it's on my face. But I also know that it is part of my journey to be able to teach people what is possible. And so now the irony, how many people are experiencing character assassinations? How many people are experiencing bankruptcy? There were 2 tools in my toolkit that I needed to be able to assist those at the highest level of leadership to navigate. Everything is imperfection, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I have been to places people cannot even comprehend. I understand hell on earth to the extremity. And this isn't a comparing game, but I've also heard stories that have my story fade into insignificancy, which is the profound nature of the work that we do. But I do believe that I'm here for a reason, I survived for a reason. The education that I've developed is meant to get into the hands of those that can make a difference. I know I have the solution to most of the mental ailments on this planet. But like anything, you know, when you're trying to disrupt status quo, not from a controversial standpoint, but because you know that the solution is tried and proven and it works, that whether I'm alive or dead, I know the education at some point will end up in the schooling system, will end up in the hands of those. My passion is obviously with the special forces as well. I would love to see a non-drug related solution to PTSD, a non-drug related solution to ADHD and all the other acronym oriented diagnoses. I'm not in any way, shape, or form taking away from the medical profession where it is warranted. I'm just talking about the percentage that is not warranted, where it should not be drug dependent. So if I had to go through all of that to create an education curriculum that is non-drug related, to be able to change fundamentally the human psyche as we know it, then so be it. And I'll just plug in my computer because it's about to die.
Thank you for sharing that, Sally. It's you know, given your position, it's a massive exposure of vulnerability and truth to share that with people. It's the rawest of truths, you know, and I do believe it is truth rather than even just your truth. And I know on an earlier discussion off screen, I'd asked you when you shared the 2018 and the bankruptcy, and because there's a question of, well, if you've got it sorted and you're teaching all this leadership and you're teaching people how to, you know, how to transform, and then through your own and you're saying, you know, you can bring about what happens in your life, and then this happened. So why do you think you brought it about? And it, you know, and you told me a few things, and of course you've said it so eloquently now, that actually you needed to experience it, because look what's happening now. And through that experience, the way that you help people is not, look, I've been through it, so you can bloody go through it as well. It's not about that, but it's about understanding people, energy, circumstances at a basal level. And when you can understand it, having lived it and experienced it and healed from it, you're in such a phenomenal position to empower other people to heal from it. Because, like I said, you're not giving them a pill. They have to do the work.
Yep.
Everybody has to be prepared to do the work. But when you do, and you can stand in the example that you have stood in, and I mean, I don't think anybody listening or watching this cannot see what a genuine, phenomenal, passionate, compassionate person you are. And, you know, and that shame on those who try to take you down. But you know what? You cannot, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And nobody can destroy you. They can just transform you into something even more phenomenal.
That's also interesting. Also, I mean, I've never had revenge. I've never felt hatred. Love is the only thing that matters. I understand the default identity. Do I harbor any illness against anybody who's so-called wronged me in the past? No. Wherever they were at on their journey is where they're at on their journey. My focus isn't on the perpetrator. So part of my unique philosophy around forgiveness, having done a good 30 years of research into the whole topic of forgiveness. In the first 60-minute documentary that I did, it was the highest watched 60-minute segment of the history of 60 Minutes in New Zealand. It won the Qantas Humanitarian Award that year because I met one of my perpetrators. And at the end of the documentary, the core message was, the only person who loses out of the inability to forgive is the person who can't forgive. And so I'm completely opposite in the way that I view forgiveness. So most people, the focus around forgiveness is on the perpetrator, the event, or the happening. 90%, maybe 10% themselves. And I call it intellectual forgiveness. They speak it, but they don't genuinely feel it. And you can test that, because if the impact of the perpetration, the event, or the happening is still impacting them, they haven't forgiven. Whereas my philosophy is that 90% of the focus is on yourself, 10% the happening, the perpetrator, or the event. What's happened. You can't change that. But what you can change is stopping being a perpetrator to yourself. So I became worse than the mongrel mob to myself. I became my own worst perpetrator. The person I had to forgive was me. And I also believe I had to go through that apprenticeship to be able to teach people to come home. And, you know, a lot of my processes are unorthodox, and it's coming through now, so I'm going to speak it, although it's unorthodox. I'm going to speak it anyway, because it gets results. So I'll say to somebody, which isn't in your standard coaching 101 manual, especially if they have done a good 10, 20 years of dragging their past with them, and the event happened 20 years ago. I'll say to them, because they have an inner critic and the degree to which they're beating the crap out of themselves, I'll ask them the question, are you a child abuser? Which is a bit unorthodox. And they'll go, what do you mean? Of course not. I go, great, okay. So if there was a 5-year-old child standing beside you right now, would you berate that child the way you berate yourself most days? They go, oh God, no. I go, okay. If you were to get a photo of yourself between the age of 3 and 5 and reconnect to who you were before you shut down, you've been beating the crap out of that child for 10, 20, 30 years. And I'll ask you again, are you a child abuser? In the context of this conversation, it takes a while for them to get it, and then they admit it, right? I go, I'm wanting you to admit it because I want you to immediately connect to what it is that you've been doing, not spend months with me and all the rest of it. The immediacy. If you found a child that had been abused in a room Would you take the child out of the room, nurture it for a few weeks, and then throw the child back into the room? I don't think so. You'd take the child out of the room and you'd want to nurture it for the rest of your life. So for people to land that they are their own child abusers to themselves, right, is a connection point and a wake-up call. Now, if you want to continue to beat the crap out of yourself for the next week or 2 weeks or all the rest of it, right, and go back into same old, you need to own that you are a child abuser fully goddamn fledged. And until you, because shifting people experientially, until you get present to the cost of what you've done to yourself when you did nothing wrong, what on earth did you do wrong that warranted the level of self-abuse that you've been giving yourself? So joining the dots for people in realizing that you can't do anything about the event, the happening of the perpetrator, but you can do something about what you've been doing to yourself. And that can only occur through healing. And 99.9% of the people on this planet are unhealed. And we don't have healing at the most senior levels of leadership. I'm sorry, but why am I the only one banging the tambourine on ensuring that healing is one of the #1 strategies? I'd say in the top 3, if I'm honest. If you want to change your friggin' bottom line, if you want to understand what's happening at the default level of undercurrent within your organization, look at the top 8, look at the top 10. They don't even know. Most of those 8 to 10 people don't know about each other. You know, one of the things I recommend when coaching exec teams is to each person to do a presentation in front of the exec, kind of like open kimono, full transparency. Let's understand everybody's backgrounds. Let's understand what everybody's been through. Let's understand and actually get to know who the hell's in this forum, because here's the deal. All of those experiences is impacting the success of this organization. If nobody knows about it and what you're dealing with now and you're managing it through your IQ and your traditional leadership teachings, without me sounding like I'm taking the piss, but I am, you know, things have got to change. You know, they're now being forced to change. And I believe healing, and of course, there is a need to ensure that healing is understood and that the right practitioners are involved. So healing in isolation is not sustainable. Coaching in isolation is not sustainable. The two together, bloody formidable. So I work with some of the best healers on the planet in conjunction with the work that I do to achieve that full spectrum of sustainable change. And if I have my way, I keep banging the tambourine on the importance of healing at the executive level. It needs to happen. It's a no-brainer. We have human beings in these ecosystems that need to address what's impacting their human potential, individually and as a collective.
Thank you, Sally. And yeah, let's not forget that exposure of vulnerability is sometimes your greatest strength. Okay, so it's again, it's how you view it. This is not me being weak. This is me being strong.
Yeah,
and learning to let go. And the forgiveness piece resonates with me so much. That's my step 2 for getting what you want, because we punish nobody but ourselves, and we can do it for years, as you did, as I did, as so many people do, until we awaken. And yeah, you don't have to carry on like that for 50 years, and you don't have to run your business or your corporation in that way either, right?
I feel very privileged by the opportunity. The God in me acknowledges the God in you. Profound work that you're doing and enabling thought leaders to get their message to market. So really,
it's just so powerful. It's so powerful. So thank you for sharing that vulnerability, which is phenomenal strength, which I know shines through. I am the honored one, Sally, and you know, and we're out of time, but I just, you know, thank you so much. I would love people to be able to connect with you. Now, obviously your clients are, you know, it's the influencers. So I know you work with politicians, with the very high-end executives, CEOs, millionaires, billionaires, the military, but also the content you put out on LinkedIn is phenomenal. So you do a Monday motivation, Tuesday,
pay it forward. So
Wednesday,
evolving leadership consciousness.
Thursday,
mindset mastery. And Friday is something of an informative nature, be it a great book, a great movie, great TED talk.
Yeah, so please do, you know, connect with Sally on LinkedIn. So Sally Anderson. That's all
Yep.
they need
So,
to search for, and I'll put the link in the notes.
so LinkedIn is the only social media medium that I use from a business standpoint, and I offer a 1-hour free consultation, and would love to dance in conversation with anybody who resonates in wanting to go to the next level of their trajectory from a leadership standpoint, and obviously interested in talking to influencers that have an interest in changing the future of. I think about all of those veterans as an example who are returning from war. If they had an alternative to experiencing PTSD and being able to play a part just in that sector, that would be one hell of a legacy for me. So
Yeah.
Anybody who's in a position of authority that can make change, I'd be welcoming of a conversation.
Yeah, so please do get in touch. And yeah, if you're not that person, but you know someone else who must speak to Sally, then please do connect and reach out to her on LinkedIn, Sally Anderson. Thank you so much, my darling. Thank you. The beginning of your day still and the end of mine here in the UK. So that's all we have time for. Please do hit the subscribe button and do share with your friends. This is such a powerful message, and so much of this is impactful. You know, people need to hear it, so please do share. Please hit the subscribe button. We are out of time, so for now, my 3 favorite words: be free, be fun, be fearless. Bye for now. Feel on top of the world with Light Changes Coaching. Do you feel like burying your head in the sand, hoping it will all be fine when you come out? Do you know what you want, but no idea how to get it? Are you stuck on the treadmill, repeating the same old patterns, wishing the answers would just be there for you? How great would it feel to have those answers right there in the palm of your hand? Well, did you know that there is a way to get immediate answers, fast resolution of inner problems, and quick access to a higher state of awareness? After 20 years of helping people, I have perfected a special technique that allows you to tap into your intuition. Connect with your intuition in just 5 minutes a day using this special technique, Dr. Rana's gift technique, the guided intuition and fulfillment training, and you can have those light bulb moments every day. So get what you want, a job that gets you excited when you get up in the morning, a relationship where you can look across the table and think how much you love that person, a body that you're proud to have and look in the mirror and absolutely love, a bank balance that you're not afraid to look at. My gift to you is simple, quick technique to access your intuition and give you the instant answers you need to get unstuck without having to do lengthy meditations. So head on over right now to lightchangescoaching.com and download yours.